As the war involving Iran, the United States, and Israel drags into a prolonged and increasingly complex phase, a new figure has quietly moved to the center of Washington's diplomatic strategy, J.D. Vance. What began as a high-intensity military confrontation is now evolving into a test of endurance, negotiation leverage, and geopolitical positioning. And in that transition, Vance is no longer a secondary player. He is rapidly becoming the administration's most critical voice on how the war ends. Recent reporting confirms that Vance has taken a leading role in behind-the-scenes diplomacy. He has held multiple direct conversations with Benjamin Netanyahu, engaged extensively with Gulf leaders, and participated in indirect communication channels with Iranian officials. Inside the White House, officials increasingly view him as the administration's most viable negotiator, someone who combines loyalty to Donald Trump with a more cautious, pragmatic approach to prolonged conflict. Before the war began, Vance had already distinguished himself as one of the more skeptical voices within Trump's circle. He questioned how long the conflict might last and warned about the strain it could place on U.S. military resources. That skepticism has now become central to his diplomatic credibility. According to officials, his long-standing reluctance toward open-ended wars makes him more acceptable not only to segments of the American political establishment, but also, crucially, to Iranian decision-makers. One senior U.S. official put it bluntly, saying if the Iranians can't strike a deal with Vance, they don't get a deal. The statement reflects just how central his role has become, signaling that Washington may now be consolidating its diplomatic efforts around a single negotiator rather than a broader team of envoys. Behind the scenes, however, Vance's rise has not been without friction, particularly with Israel's leadership. A recent phone call between Vance and Netanyahu reportedly exposed deep disagreements over the early assumptions of the war. According to multiple reports, Vance challenged Netanyahu's earlier claims that toppling Iran's leadership would be relatively straightforward. One U.S. source described the exchange in stark terms. Before the war, Bibi really sold it as being easy.
The same source added that Vance approached those claims with a far more realistic assessment. This moment appears to mark one of the first instances where a senior figure within Trump's administration openly pushed back on Israel's framing of the war. Vance's growing influence is reshaping how the United States approaches the conflict, not just militarily, but diplomatically.
He has already met with senior officials from key Gulf nations to discuss ceasefire options and regional stability. These engagements are part of a wider effort to build a coalition framework for eventual negotiations with Iran. At the same time, indirect channels with Tehran remain active, often mediated through regional actors. Iran itself has shown mixed signals. While publicly rejecting U.S. pressure, some internal figures, including Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, have emerged as potential interlocutors in future talks. This suggests that even within Iran, there are divisions over whether and how to engage diplomatically with Washington. Another striking development is the apparent shift away from traditional U.S. envoys. Earlier in the conflict, figures like Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner were expected to play leading roles in negotiations. But as the war has progressed, Vance has increasingly taken center stage. In internal discussions, Trump himself has publicly emphasized Vance's role in negotiations, effectively elevating him as the administration's primary diplomatic face. This shift raises an important question. Is Vance being positioned as the sole channel for serious talks with Iran? Some reports suggest that Iranian officials may actually prefer dealing with him over other U.S. representatives. If true, this would give Vance unique leverage, not just within the U.S. government, but also in shaping how negotiations unfold internationally. Vance's rise has also triggered tensions beyond Washington. Within the U.S. administration, some advisors believe that elements in Israel are attempting to portray him as too soft or insufficiently hawkish. These concerns were amplified after reports suggested that Iran viewed Vance as the most acceptable U.S. negotiator. One administration official dismissed the narrative sharply, saying it's an Israeli op against J.D. Israeli officials, however, have denied any such campaign, insisting there is no evidence of efforts to undermine the vice president. Still, the mere existence of these accusations highlights the fragile and often mistrustful dynamics between allies during wartime. From a strategic standpoint, Vance's position reflects a balancing act within the Trump administration. On one hand, Washington continues to pursue aggressive military pressure on Iran, including strikes on infrastructure and military assets. On the other hand, the White House is actively seeking a diplomatic off-ramp, an outcome that can be presented domestically as both a victory and a resolution. Vance sits at the intersection of those two goals. He has supported the use of overwhelming force once the war began, aligning himself with Trump's broader strategy, but he has also consistently emphasized the need for a realistic endgame. This dual approach makes him uniquely suited to deliver a deal that satisfies both political and strategic objectives. For Tehran, Vance represents a complicated but potentially advantageous figure. On one side, his skepticism toward prolonged wars suggests he may be open to compromise. On the other, his current role within the Trump administration means any deal he negotiates would carry significant weight and likely involve tough concessions. Iranian leadership has not yet fully committed to formal negotiations. Reports indicate that final approval would need to come from the highest levels of the regime. But the emergence of figures like Ghalibaf suggests that internal discussions are already underway about how to approach potential talks. The broader conflict itself is entering a new phase. What began as a rapid escalation of strikes has transformed into a prolonged struggle defined by logistics, resources, and political will. The United States has already deployed significant military assets, while Iran has demonstrated its ability to sustain resistance through both conventional and asymmetric means. At the same time, global economic pressures, particularly around energy markets and shipping routes, are adding urgency to diplomatic efforts. In this environment, the question is no longer just who can win militarily, but who can endure and who can negotiate from a position of strength. Ultimately, Vance's authority remains tied to President Trump. Officials close to the administration emphasize that while Vance plays a leading role in diplomacy, he operates within the framework set by the president. Trump has already extended deadlines for negotiations, signaling a willingness to give diplomacy more time, even as military options remain on the table. For Trump, the ideal outcome is clear: a deal that ends the conflict while reinforcing his image as a decisive leader. Vance's task is to make that outcome achievable. For Vance himself, this moment represents a defining test. He is no longer just a vice president supporting policy. He is now one of the central architects of how this war could end. His ability to navigate tensions with Israel, engage with Gulf allies, and open channels with Iran will determine whether diplomacy succeeds or fails. It will also shape his own political future. If he delivers a deal, he could emerge as one of the most influential figures in U.S. foreign policy. If he fails, the consequences could extend far beyond Washington, deepening a conflict that already threatens to destabilize the entire region. The rise of J.D. Vance in the Iran war is not just a story about one individual. It is a reflection of shifting power dynamics within the United States and across the Middle East. His growing influence suggests a recalibration of strategy away from unchecked escalation and toward a more complex mix of pressure and negotiation. But it also raises difficult questions. Is he reshaping U.S. policy or simply executing Trump's vision? Is he bridging divides or exposing them? And most importantly, can he actually deliver peace in a conflict where so many interests remain fundamentally opposed? As the war grinds on, those questions remain unanswered. What is clear, however, is that J.D. Vance is now at the center of them all.